Poverty, by America. By Matthew Desmond. Discover the shocking truth with this New York Times bestseller. Summary and essential themes. Find out what can be done to end poverty in the United States. 1 in 9 Americans. That's how many people in the United States grapple with poverty. A whopping 38 million struggle to secure fundamental necessities, no less than 1 million public school kids are homeless, and at least 30 million people don't have basic health insurance. These figures become even more alarming when you take into account just how affluent the United States is. The country's gross domestic product is so colossal that you could combine the economies of the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth wealthiest countries in the world, and the result would still fall short of the U.S. economic prowess. In a country that's such a massive powerhouse, it's puzzling why people continue to experience poverty. In 1970, just under 13% of the population was poor. 5 decades later, that figure has only dropped marginally, to 10.5%. Why is that so? Well, what most people don't realize is that poverty extends far beyond the issue of limited income. It's a complex tapestry of material scarcity, interlinked with multiple social challenges, including housing, health and education. In this video ahead, we'll delve into how these factors contribute to poverty, and what the government and community can do to abolish it. Key Idea 1. End the exploitation of workers. If you think of worker exploitation, what comes to mind? Child laborers from former times, perhaps, or factory personnel in inhumane conditions? In some places, these atrocities still exist. But there are also modern-day versions of labor exploitation that many people are unaware of. Firstly, there's low wages. When you account for inflation, the wages earned by most Americans today are nearly the same as they were 4 decades ago. In fact, the annual increase in inflation-adjusted wages since 1979 has barely scratched the surface, edging up by a mere 0.3%. Even in 2020, at least 1 million workers were compensated with hourly wages that sat at or below the minimum of $7.25. Unfortunately, corporations are reluctant to initiate wage increases themselves, fearing that increased labor costs might impact profits and, subsequently, their market value. To tackle this, Congress should take matters into its own hands. It needs to raise the minimum wage and prioritize it in the same way that it prioritized workplace safety regulations. However, it's crucial that the minimum wage is also reviewed and adjusted regularly, to keep pace with economic changes. Rather than depending exclusively on Congress, the authority to set the minimum wage should be delegated to the central government or a specifically appointed individual, such as the Secretary of Labor. Another more favorable strategy could involve empowering employees and employers to jointly negotiate and amend the minimum wage through collaborative bargaining agreements. In addition to the concern over inadequate wages, temporary work also impacts economic well-being. Using temp agencies to fulfill their manpower requirements allows corporations to reduce their obligations to workers and increase their cost savings. For instance, tech company Apple boasts a global workforce of approximately 750,000 individuals. But a mere 63,000 of these are directly employed by the company itself. Being an independent contractor or temp worker impacts an individual's work benefits and compensation. These workers aren't covered by employee benefits and minimum wage laws. They don't get sick days, overtime pay, or even unemployment insurance. Additionally, temp workers can't pursue promotions because they aren't employed by the company in the first place. How can independent contractors have a voice then? The answer lies in union power. Historically, unions have been instrumental in advocating for fair working conditions and compensation. Regrettably, organized labor saw its downfall in the early 1980s, when corporations realized they could easily onboard new hires to replace unionized workers who went on strike. Employers continue to obstruct unions today, threatening workers with business closure and job loss, and leaving a significant 94% of private sector workers without union representation. Implementing new labor laws that streamline the process of organizing and promoting sectoral bargaining would address these disparities. An approach like this aims to organize workers not only within a single store or company but also across an entire sector. By doing so, a broader range of workers, encompassing both independent contractors and full-time employees, can gain empowerment. Key Idea 2. Eradicate consumer exploitation. Exploitation doesn't end when the poor clock out of work, it persists in their daily lives through so-called consumer exploitation. Put simply, consumer exploitation happens when you pay more than something is worth. For instance, if a handmade bag is worth $25 but the vendor sold it to you for $100, you're being exploited as a consumer. Consumer exploitation takes on various forms in the lives of poor people, with one of the most evident examples arising within the rental housing industry. Across America, median rents have climbed at least 200% from 2000 to 2021, much faster than renters' incomes. The worst part, however, is that rents in poor neighborhoods are not notably lower than those in more affluent communities. This is perplexing, since residences in poverty-stricken locations are often run down and aging. And yet landlords in such communities can yield around double the profits compared to their counterparts in rich areas, a clear indication of them unfairly capitalizing on their properties. A few strategies are available to eliminate exploitation in the housing sector. Firstly, the poor need to have more choices when it comes to deciding where to live. They could opt for public housing in complexes that come complete with fitness centers and swimming pools. However, for this welfare program to be effective, the government must first increase its existing funding to accommodate the overwhelming demand it already faces. Secondly, low-income individuals could choose to own a home. Mortgage payments are often more affordable than rent, but unfortunately, banks refuse to finance inexpensive homes due to their lower profitability. Given these circumstances, the government can provide first-time home buyers with expanded financing alternatives instead. Finally, there's the option to move into tenant-owned and operated apartments. These are housing units that tenants have purchased from their landlords and subsequently transformed into cooperatives. In doing so, negligent property owners are taken out of the equation, giving more power to the tenants themselves. Local authorities should get behind such efforts and support more tenant rights organizations and cooperatives. Besides private property landlords, low-income people also fall victim to fringe institutions like check cashers and payday lenders. Check cashing services eat up 1 to 10% of the total amount, resulting in workers losing a significant portion of their income. Conversely, payday lenders impose excessively high annual percentage rates, sometimes reaching 664% for a 2-week $300 loan. While the rate doesn't appear to be that absurd at first glance, an average borrower actually ends up with $520 in fees for a loan of $375, when extension fees are factored in. Solving these fringe institution issues doesn't necessarily entail eliminating them altogether. Instead, the poor should be provided with more credit alternatives to choose from. One viable approach could involve the Federal Reserve or the U.S. Postal Service offering small dollar loans. The government could also modify regulations to encourage commercial banks to offer such solutions as well. Essentially, the antidote to exploitation is the provision of choices. The greater the range of options available to individuals, the lower the likelihood of them falling prey to exploitation. Key idea 3. Rebalance social safety net policies to support the poor. With the prevailing poverty in the U.S., you'd think the government wasn't doing anything to help. But in reality, there are a host of social safety net policies already in place, ranking the U.S. as the country with the second largest welfare state system next to France. Between the years 1980 and 2018, expenditures on anti-poverty initiatives grew substantially by over 230%, to almost $3,500 per person. For the health coverage program Medicaid alone, federal government spending reached over $520 billion in 2021. Then, there's the food stamps program that provides assistance to 9 million Americans, and the unemployment insurance that supported over 3 million people throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Income-boosting tax credits, like the Earned Income Tax Credit and Child Tax Credit, are two of the biggest anti-poverty initiatives helping those in need today. Unfortunately, there are a few concerns surrounding federal welfare programs. To begin with, many people are unaware that they're eligible for government aid. And even if they are aware, the application process tends to be cumbersome. A telling example is Social Security disability insurance, where merely a third of applications are granted approval. This compels individuals to resort to hiring a disability lawyer just to get approved. To combat this, the government should work on raising awareness and providing application assistance to increase enrollment rates. On top of the uninformed masses and tedious application process, an even more pressing concern is that federal welfare programs often disproportionately benefit the upper classes more than the poor. Take homeowner subsidies, for instance. The initiative racked up spending of $193 billion in 2020, the majority of which went to families with six-figure incomes and those buying their second or third homes. Tax breaks far exceeded this figure at $1.8 trillion in 2021, but around half of the benefits were enjoyed by the top 20%. Sure, income taxes are reduced for lower-income individuals, but not every kind of tax follows suit. With all taxes considered, there isn't a remarkable disparity between the 25% that the poor pay in taxes, and the 28% that the rich do. Interestingly, the 400 wealthiest Americans pay the lowest rate, just 23%. Raising the top marginal tax rate seems like the obvious solution. This could involve reinstating the 1986 rate of 50%. Corporate tax rates should go up, as well. Currently, they're at their lowest in over 8 decades, a mere 21%. They could instead follow the 35% of previous decades. In addition to changing current tax laws, the government should intensify its efforts to address tax avoidance. Affluent households and multinational corporations utilize devious strategies to evade their tax obligations, costing the U.S. at least $1 trillion in unpaid taxes every year. Putting a stop to this corrupt practice calls for Congress to provide the Internal Revenue Service with ample resources to actively pursue cheaters. The revenue generated from these efforts could be redirected to anti-poverty initiatives, like ensuring safer and more affordable housing for the underprivileged, eradicating hunger in the country, and mitigating health-related challenges. Key Idea 4. Integrate, not segregate from the outside. It looks like modern-day America has significantly moved past the deep-seated racial divide that marked the 1900s. However, while the overt signs of segregation may have been diminished, a subtler, less visible form of segregation endures beneath the surface. This comes in the form of exclusionary zoning laws. Exclusionary zoning laws dictate the types of properties allowed in residential areas. While they might appear to be reasonable regulations, a closer examination of these ordinances reveals that they're actually designed to shut out specific groups of individuals. That's because people from various socioeconomic backgrounds tend to inhabit different types of properties, as seen with the affluent living in expansive mansions and the less privileged occupying apartment complexes. By prohibiting the construction of certain kinds of housing in communities, exclusionary zoning laws are effectively saying to the poor, "You're not welcome here." In 2021, a study across 100 cities in the U.S. reported that the median central city allocated just 12% of its residential land for apartment buildings. The New York Times also noted in 2019 that in numerous cities, 75% of residential property is zoned exclusively for single-family detached dwellings. This ushers in a multitude of problems for low-income individuals. Exclusive communities hoard opportunities within their walls. They have secure streets, superior educational institutions, and a higher quality of life overall. But because of exclusionary zoning ordinances, the poor can't access this prosperity and are left at a disadvantage outside the figurative wall. For this very reason, it's imperative that the government dismantles the wall. Do away with exclusionary zoning ordinances and promote inclusionary ones instead. This, however, will take not one but two steps. First, eliminate the regulations that hinder the construction of more affordable housing options. Second, require developers to build these housing options as part of the residential neighborhood. This guarantees that the poor can readily get into these prosperous areas, should they wish to do so. Additionally, Congress could work on providing incentives to communities that agree to affordable housing. For instance, homeowners could qualify for property tax breaks, or their local public school or sewer system could receive more funding. On the other hand, those who advocate for exclusionary zoning could be denied federal financial support for the maintenance or enhancement of local public services. Inclusionary zoning policies aim to integrate the prosperous with the less privileged. And while it may be a tall order to fill, its benefits to low-income families would make the efforts worthwhile. Key Idea 5. Participate in the fight against poverty. It's no secret that the government and huge businesses play a pivotal role in abolishing poverty. However, this responsibility doesn't rest solely on their shoulders. You, in your own small or big way, can also contribute to the cause of poverty eradication. Start with changing the way you do certain things. For instance, champion integration in your neighborhood. When you get to know the underprivileged, you become exposed to their personal challenges and concerned for their well-being. This will ultimately push you and your peers to care more about anti-poverty initiatives and public services. Where you shop and invest also matters. Stop putting your money in the wallets of businesses that engage in labor exploitation and instead, opt to support those that prioritize their employees. Buy their products, use their services, invest in their stocks, and proudly recommend them. This will inspire others to make similar conscientious choices. When enough people get behind the idea of poverty abolishment, it can lead to a mass movement that sparks change. Such a demanding movement is exactly what the United States needs to uplift marginalized communities and reshape societal norms. Final summary. Poverty is a complex web of problems far beyond material scarcity. It encompasses issues of labor and consumer exploitation, imbalanced social safety net policies, and invisible segregation. By bolstering efforts to solve these issues from the root, the government, private businesses, and the community hold the potential to disassemble this intricate web and eliminate poverty. Doing so can move the nation closer to realizing an economically secure future for all.